Hey guys, VHS82 apostrophe, aka Rob from Georgia, here with you with episode 7 entitled Missing Link. First aired back in January of 76, I believe. And guest stars Peter Cushing is the alien Raan, and Joanna Dunham as his daughter Vanna. Together, they both actually, interestingly enough, were both in The House That Dripped Blood. I think it's an anthology, which, funny, I just sort of ran into this by accident, but Mrparka actually reviewed this just recently, and if I remember, I'm going to drop the link to that down below, because that is definitely worth listening to. And I don't have that movie, but now that I've seen these two together, and I know in the anthology they're not together. I think one is in one segment and the other is in another segment. But anyways, just a little bit of trivia. So we're still on disc number 2, but very quickly we'll be leaving disc 2 to go to disc 3 as we continue our adventure with Moonbase Alpha. And also too, if you've never known about this book by Kenneth Muir, this is definitely worth picking up if you're really curious about getting some extra insight into all the episodes. That is Space 1999. It is definitely worth the pickup. All right, so Missing Link. Let's just start off right off at the beginning. I don't ever generally do this kind of thing because I think it's rude, in terms of the creators of the show or movie or whatever. But I couldn't help when I got to my like 5th or 6th time watching this, I couldn't help when Raan delivers, Peter Cushing gives his last line, until tomorrow. I couldn't help to think to myself, that might have been a more appropriate name for this episode. And the more I think about it, I think it really would. It just lends itself to just the abstract quality that is in here. And just the idea that you have a show that is dealing at its center point with the battle between emotion and intellect. On the one side, we'll have these race people, beings that are like Vulcans in a way, right? They are just heavy. They have dropped emotion a long time ago. Now they live in the world of just intellect, which, sort of brings its own problems. But then, we look at humans and they still live in the world of pure emotion, which obviously brings problems. And Raan, Peter Cushing's character, is seeking, really, as a matter of trying to find that perfect balance. Is there even a perfect balance between pure intellect and sort of, that state of just emotion and how it can rule our lives sometimes into not good ends. And so really that is kind of like the focus, but this show deals with so much more. I mean, I know Kenneth Muir mentions in his book about animal rights at such an early point, sort of is woven into here, but also when is it truly time to pull, to allow someone to go, because the only thing really keeping them alive is a machine. And that really drives a lot of the emotion on Moonbase Alpha towards its climax of the episode. I thought everything in this show worked almost flawlessly to perfection. It's hard sometimes when you're dealing with, some heavy hitting stuff. Does it work? And in this episode, it works so well. And so really basically the setup, what you have here is initially, and at the beginning of every episode, they have this episode, and then you get a lot of, clips from the episode that you're about to watch, which is always pretty cool. But right off the beginning, Eagle One is coming back. Victor and Sandra and Koenig have been out to investigate this purple planet, which is, of course, where we will meet Peter Cushing and his daughter. And so as they're coming back to the, shock of Moonbase Alpha, it's because something bad has happened, and they ultimately crash on the lunar surface. And when they go out to retrieve them, those three, you find that Koenig is in sort of like, he's in a coma state. And so the only way to get him back safely to Moonbase Alpha is literally just disattach the front piece of Ego 1 and literally carry it back via another one of the transport ships, and then try to figure out what's going on with him. Well, they don't know this, but he is now really held captive by Raan, who wants to study him for the reasons I already sort of laid out. But the very beginning, once you get sort of through that, when they send the other Ego 1 out to, retrieve the bodies or get them, it's weird. It's like, and it's the first of many experiments that Raan will work on Koenig. And you see Koenig is out in his suit, and he's trying to flag down the Ego 1 as it's approaching. Of course, they just go right by him like they don't even see him. It's because they don't see him, because this is part of an experiment we'll see. And so he basically makes his way back to Moonbase Alpha, goes in. Of course, no one's there. It's all empty, right? But we're given a couple clues, several clues, that this really is not Moonbase Alpha. Now, Muir points out one of the clues is when Koenig is in one of the medical rooms, he'll see his life support monitor thing, whatever, and you'll see his name up there, and the camera will focus in on that, and it's misspelled. Instead of OE, it's EO, right? And that is a clue. I'm pretty sure that is a clue for us as a viewer that we're not really at Moonbase Alpha. But there's a clue before that Muir does not mention, and I caught it as he's coming through from the elevators. Koenig is coming through the elevator into the complex. There's a nameplate up above the door, and all it says is, if I remember, I should have wrote it down. I didn't. All it says is Alpha Base, when it really should say Moonbase Alpha. And so there's subtle clues. And then when he's kind of wandering this really sort of, and it will, eventually all this will get nightmarish for him. But as he's walking through this sort of empty, abandoned, just void of life, monitors don't work, and it's just not, and you do see, you'll see a creepy moment where Raan's reflection will be seen in a mirror. You'll also see a moment when Vanna will, behind him, will see her move from, across an entranceway. And it all kind of gives this really weird, creepy, and eventually, Koenig will eventually have a nightmare as a result of another experiment where Raan will, and this is a great scene, but he'll put him back on Moonbase Alpha, but again, it's not really Moonbase Alpha. And he'll have this conversation with Victor. Of course, it's not really Professor Bergman, but Bergman will do, Raan just doesn't understand these people and the complexity and the dynamics of the relationships. And so he can't fool Koenig. But Victor kind of goes on and on in a really sort of angry way about just how he's finished with this whole thing. It's better because they're basically living on a tomb and they're never going to get off. And he's just going on. And Koenig, eventually we realize, from him later that he ultimately sees through this because he knows this is not Victor's character. He just knows, but he admits to wanting to believe in it initially, because I think he's even susceptible to, how long can we do this? And I thought that is inherently an interesting thing to work with, because it brings just a realism to this whole show that as fantastic as the idea is that this moon has been launched out into space, there's a realism in the sense of how they deal with it and how people generally would deal with something crazy like that. And so Raan will continue to play with them. But then something weird happens. Koenig suddenly, and you're not really ever understand if it's intent, if it's real, or maybe he's just giving up, and he decides, surprisingly, that maybe he will stay on this planet, but it's because he's fallen in love with Vanna, and that is the wrench in the machine that Raan cannot tolerate. And so, unknowingly, perhaps to Koenig, when he suddenly, this begins to happen, he really is working his way out of there. But it's interesting because in the end, Koenig, when he's having his last finally friendly conversation, and they're always friendly conversations, but Koenig doesn't, obviously, none of us would want to be, an experiment to someone. And that's all he's really being to Raan, as an experiment, because Raan wants to get at the heart of is there a middle ground? Can we reach that perfect state of having both emotion and intellect, but they counterbalance each other perfectly, right? And having this conversation, and Koenig mentions to Raan, well, maybe perhaps you brought me here for your daughter, to teach her something. And Raan says, perhaps, maybe. But it ends up that Koenig ends up learning a lesson of his own. Well, he refers to it not really so much as a lesson, as something, maybe a realization. And so there's an interesting conversation they have at the end. And that is when Raan will finally deliver the last line of, until tomorrow. Until tomorrow. The nightmare scene is pretty awesome, man. Koenig, as a result of the argument, I think, with Victor in that experiment, his psychosis, man, he just gets psychotic and he starts imagining all these monsters and stuff, which, yeah, in a sense might come across as a little cheesy. But when you consider 1974, I mean, this is an interesting piece of film, and maybe the best one is you got one where it shows the brain, and there's this other one's coming. There's one coming down from top, and then maybe the most executed, the best executed moment, I think, of that scenario is when Koenig suddenly wakes up. He's in a chair and he's like enmeshed in a spider's web. And he sees Victor running towards him, and he's just like, man, he's about to go insane. And it's a really effective moment. Everything just counters each other perfectly in this episode. And that's not even to say everything Helena goes through when this whole time, because they don't understand what's going on. Sandra's sort of in and out of it. And then, of course, Koenig's in his coma, and she gets to the point where she basically gives. She gives up is a weird phrase. It's not like she ever really gives up. She just doesn't know what else to do. And is it good to him to leave him on a life support when without it, he's gone? But Alan, and the loyalty that Alan shows to him, man, then this was where the emotion side of it is. Everything seems to be cool and collective over on the other side. Here at Moonbase Alpha, things are just disintegrating. And it's because you have the loyalties to Koenig, and Alan does not want her to pull the plug. And it's a really interesting situation in how they execute it. And it's there's nothing in your face about it. It's just something to think about. Like, how do you work through something like that? And it was kind of hard for me because as a result of COVID, we lost my mother-in-law. And I'm not gonna get into it, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff there, and unfortunately, this episode sort of brought that up into the forefront of my mind, and so it was kind of hard to actually watch and really think about it in light of that. But there's just, and that is interesting. It's like Kenneth Muir says in his book, at the beginning in this introduction, that this is more of the offspring of Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, rather than Star Trek or anything else like that. And I think you can, when you choose that as your format, it's easier to get away with some really deep philosophical conversations about a lot of things. And I think have already seen, we'll continue to see throughout the run of this series that is the case. Now, I already know, I have not seen or revisited, should I say, year 2. I know there's a bit of drop off, but we'll see. I mean, after soaking up the entirety of year 1, it'll be interesting like this. It'll be interesting to go into year 2 and see what I think about it. So anyways, Missing Link, or as I would have entitled it, Until Tomorrow, ... I thought was fabulous. Peter Cushing is absolutely fabulous as Raan. Koenig puts off an incredible performance. Helena does as well for what she is having to go through. And just the dynamics of Moonbase Alpha in light of losing Koenig, who will be the commander. Just all that dynamic stuff is interesting and how it's played out. In the end, of course, we get Koenig back. And Helena, the relief on her face is, just how much she really cares for him and he cares for her. So it's interesting. So anyways, in light of all that, excellent episode. Next, Guardian of Pride, if that's how you say it. So that is next, and then we'll be off of disc 2 into disc 3. As always, man, go Bills.